I'm going to do a very short little mini series between now and Palm Sunday, the first Sunday of April. Nothing fancy, just call it Facing Your Future. Because whether I have 5 years left or if I have 50 years left, if I want a good future, I have to be making some right choices today. And a lot of people misunderstand this about God. They think, well, God has a plan for my life. He has a purpose for my life. And the scripture says he planned this long ago before I was even born, so it must all be predestined. I'm just a cute little dancing puppet. There are no real choices in my life. I'll just get up in the morning and I'll just do whatever it is God's already planned for me to do. Now, the problem is the Bible teaches just the opposite. Now, yes, God has a plan and a purpose for all of us, but it's not automatic. And a lot of people miss God's plan and purpose because they don't realize they are the ones that have to make the choices. Now, to bring that home today and in the weeks ahead, I want to look at something said by Moses, good old picture of Charlton Heston up there. And then I want you to see something that the New Testament said about Moses. Without a doubt, Moses was the greatest leader of the Old Testament. He unified a nation of Israel who had been in slavery for 400 years. He liberated them without force from the bondage in Egypt. God gave him the 10 Commandments. He wrote the first 5 books of your Old Testament. Probably nobody is more important to Old Testament leadership than this guy Moses. So, he's speaking for God, but I want you to look, number one, at what he says to the people. And this is right before they went into the Promised Land. He says, today, I'm giving you a choice. You can choose life and success, or you can choose death and disaster. I'm commanding you to, number one, love the Lord your God. And number 2, live the way he told you. And number 3, obey his laws and teachings. You're about to cross the Jordan River and take the land that he's given you. If you obey him, you will live, you will become successful and powerful. Now that's a promise. But it's very clear you have to make the choices. You have to love God. You have to live the way God wants you to live. And you have to obey God's teaching. But it says if you do all that, then you'll be successful and powerful. But, and Moses continues, if you disobey and refuse to listen and are led away to worship other gods, you will be destroyed. You will not live long in that land across the Jordan that you're about to occupy. I'm now giving you the choice between life and death, between God's blessings or curse. And I call heaven to earth to witness the choice you make. Choose life. One of the greatest gifts that God could ever give us is the ability to choose. We are not puppets on a string. It has not all been decided. You realize, of course, that if we were puppets, there'd be no evil in the world. We would always do the right thing if we're just whatever God makes us do, because we had no choice. There would be no more school shootings. There would be no more racism. There'd be no more bigotry. There'd be no more war. There'd be no more sexual abuse. Because we were nothing but puppets at God's disposal. But God gave us the freedom to choose. And that is our greatest blessing. It's also our greatest responsibility. And I unfortunately have to tell you, if you choose wrongly, it will be your greatest nightmare. It will be a curse, literally, to you. Now, I got to make this clear. The choices you make today determine tomorrow. What you do 5 years from now depends on what you do this afternoon. It is just that simple. What you do 10 years, 20 years from now Depends on what you do next week. It's not, oh, what in the world will I do 5 years from now when I get there? The fact is, my decisions today will absolutely determine what I'm doing 5 years from now. Now, let's flip over to the New Testament and see what they said about Moses in a very special place. You'll see the message in yellow, I think. But it says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasure of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered. He hung in there because he saw him who is invisible. Now, let me unpack this a bit if you're not familiar completely with the story of Joseph. You remember Joseph, in one way or another, saved Egypt from famine. The people loved him. Pharaoh loved him. Joseph moved his entire family. I think there was like 65, 70 of them in his family. And they all live happily ever after. But fast forward about 400 years now. Joseph's little tiny family has now grown to a nation of over 1 million people. The new pharaohs, because Pharaoh was just a title for a king, the pharaohs after Joseph are terrified about this large group of people, so they make them slaves. And one pharaoh even makes a law that all Hebrew boys have to be put to death. And that's when Moses comes along. Now, his family's not afraid of Pharaoh, so they hide him for 3 months, but you can't hardly hide a screaming baby forever. And so instead of killing their son, they decided they were going to trust God with their son. And he built a little basket lined it with pitch and put Moses on the Nile River. I'm not even sure they knew exactly where he was going to go. But it did just so happen that Pharaoh's daughter is out taking a bath. And she sees this little basket float along beside her, and she sees this little baby and instantly just falls in love with the little fellow. So Moses is born a Hebrew, which, it's kind of the same thing as Jewish, just a little bit before the word. But he's raised an Egyptian. And he's not just raised an Egyptian, he is now the grandson of Pharaoh. Now, let me point out something in passing, and we'll get to the rest of the message. Moses' parents had to make choices for Moses when he was a baby. They hid him. Moses couldn't go out and hide himself. They were the ones who disobeyed the law. They made the basket. They put Moses in the river. They protected him. And they did all of that when Moses was a baby. And I say that because I have honestly, literally heard on several occasions parents say, well, we're not going to force our children to go to church. We're just going to let them make their own choice when they get old enough and when they're ready. And I can't tell you publicly what my reaction really is, but it's something like, seriously? Do you let your children stay up all night long if they want to before they go to bed? Do you let your children decide whether or not they're going to take a bath this week or not? And do your children come up to me and say, wait, Mom, I've just decided I'm going to eat Krispy Kremes all week, nothing else. And every school day, do you get up and say, honey, are you going to go to school today or not? I just wanted to know, plan my day. Of course not. Then why would you let the most important area of their life go? I think it has a lot to do with the value of your own faith as you see it. But I just want to point that out as when you're a parent, you have to make the decisions for your small children. Parents who don't make good decisions are not good parents because they're not being responsible. You have to make some of those unpopular decisions for your kids when they're not old enough to make them for themselves. End of that sermon. But notice it said when Moses was grown, he had to make those choices. You know, that's a mark of maturity when you have to make your own choices and your parents don't have anything to do with it anymore. It's called responsibility. 4 decisions Moses made. I think they're going to apply to all of us, but quickly, let's go through them. Number 1, he refused to be defined by others. He says he refused to be known as a son of Pharaoh's daughter. And we've talked about this before. Mature people refuse to let other people define them. They're not going to let other people determine who they are. What's that mean for Moses? Well, this guy's having an identity crisis, big time. He is born a Hebrew slave, but he's raised as Egyptian royalty, the son of Pharaoh's own daughter. He's raised of the grandson of the most powerful man in the world at that time. And at some point, Moses has to decide, who am I really? Who am I? And the decision changed the rest of his life, if you know his story. Now he's got 2 choices. He continued to be Pharaoh's grandson. If he does, he's going to have a lot of fame and fortune and luxurious lifestyle. He is going to have absolutely beautiful women peeling grapes for him the rest of his life while he sits by the pool. Or he admits his Jewish ancestry. He would become a slave. He would be humiliated. He would do slave labor. Wow, which one would you choose? It'd be a tough one for us, wouldn't it? But Moses decided he was going to be what God made him to be. When you decide to be what God has made you be, that's called integrity. And it is becoming rarer and rarer these days. So who are you? Or better yet, who are you letting define your identity? You getting it from the movies? Maybe you see a movie and you think you got to act like that. Or you're probably getting a bunch of it from social media because everybody's saying this is the way it is. You know, these days it could probably just be your best friends who are saying this is what you have to do to be cool. Moses once said, don't follow the crowd in doing wrong. He's a wise man, I think. He said, don't let the crowd trick you into doing something you don't want to do. I mean, you know you don't want to do it. But then you think, well, you know, everybody else is doing it. And the very moment you say everybody else is doing it, you've just given up your identity. Paul says our purpose is to please God, not the rest of the world. And Moses says, my life will be defined by my choice, not what you think. And my future is going to be meaningful. If your future is going to be meaningful, you have to just stop letting other people tell you who you are. Number 2, this is going to be tough, okay? You ain't going to like this one at all. You need to choose short-term pain for long-term gain. He said Moses chose to be mistreated. That's the short-term pain part. Along with the people of God, rather than enjoy the pleasure of sin for a short time. I do love the fact that the Bible tells the truth, and I think that is so cool. Sin is fun. If sin was a bummer, nobody would do it. If sin was painful, who would ever sin? But it's fun to be selfish. It's fun to be self-centered and get to do everything I want to do. There is pleasure in sin. The Bible says it, not me. But it's only for a little while. That's your second choice. When do you want your pain? I know you're not following me here, so I say it this way. We tend to avoid the long-term gain in life because we don't want to endure the short-term pain of a situation. Now, here's a fact. The vast majority of the time, the right thing is the hard thing to do. If the right thing was the easy thing to do, everybody would do the right thing, but it's not. The right thing is harder than the wrong thing. You attack me, I attack you back. That's easy. I can go with that. You criticize me, I'll criticize you right back. Easy. You say, I have to forgive you? Well, bummer, I'm not so sure about that because that's not easy. In fact, that's hard. But the right thing is almost always the harder thing to do. Another example. What is easier for me to do? To sit on the couch and watch a couple of really stupid movies, eating a big box of Krispy Kremes, or go into this little room and walk a couple miles on my treadmill? Yeah, Krispy Kremes is a whole lot easier than a treadmill. But where do you really want to be 5 years from now? Or 10 years? Or 20 years? You're going to have to choose that pain, get it over with for the gain. And those decisions have to be made today. So I kind of need to ask this in a different way. Where do you need to accept some responsibility? Who are you blaming for how your life has turned out? Who are you blaming for your unhappiness? Who are you blaming for your lack of success? Who are you blaming for your very own spiritual condition? You're not going to like this part. I told you wouldn't like, but let me just give you some truth. Number one, you're as close to God as you have chosen to be. You can't blame your husband, you can't blame your wife, your children, or anybody else. You're as close to God as you choose to be. And you don't feel close to God, well, guess who's moved? Because God didn't move anywhere. You're as close as you choose to be. And number two, you can't blame anybody else for your future. You cannot blame anybody else for the direction that your life is heading. Now, yeah, let's be real. People can hurt you. People can harm you. But no one, not even the devil, can ruin your life. Only you can ruin your life. People can hurt you. The devil can tempt you. But only you can ruin it. And you might not have thought about this one for a while. You are free this morning to choose anything you want to do. But you're not free to choose the consequences. You are absolutely free right now to do anything you want to do. You can decide what you want to eat in life, what you want to drink in life, and how much of it you want to do it, and how often you want to do it. And you can decide who you hang out with, and where you go, and what you do, and how you spend your time. But you will never be free from the consequences of your choice. And one more thing, one final thing, and this is the hard part. You don't get to live without pain in your life. You're going to have pain in your life. You either deal with it now or you deal with it later. Who was it? Jane Fonda said, no pain, no gain. Well, the young lady was right on that one. Now, so let me just boil it down theologically. You can live like an absolute jerk today. You can take no responsibility at all for your life, and you can stay immature for the next 30 years, but life will catch up with you. On the other hand, you can put in the hard work now, and you can grow, you can make the effort to be mature, and life's actually going to be easier for you down those years. But you have to decide. You have to decide where you're going to be tomorrow and then what that means today with your choice. Well, number three, an obvious one, Moses chose what God values, not what the culture. It says Moses regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt. Regarded means just to make an evaluation, weigh the evidence, make a judgment. Moses says, I'm going to make a choice. Behind door number 1, all the possessions and wealth of the world were centered in Egypt, and Moses is going to inherit a bunch of it. Or behind door number 2, he can become a slave. What's he decide? I love it the way somebody, I don't know who wrote this, I didn't. He says, it's more important for me to be with God's people in their pain than to be with the devil's people in their pleasure. So again, let me ask you something, because, preparing for your future is not easy. And again, I don't care if you have 50 years or only 5 more years, all of us need to put some real thought in the years we have. If I would ask you to write down the top 3 values of your life, what would they be? And I would even give you a half an hour maybe to think about that and tell me what they were. If I ask you to name 10 of the most important values in your life, could you do that this afternoon? Because if you can't name them, you certainly are not living by them. And if you don't know what's important to you, then other people will tell you what's important to you. They will try to make your decisions. And if you don't know why you're living life, and this is for the younger you are, the more important this is, if you don't know why you're living life, there's a real good chance you're going to miss and waste a better part of your life. And are you seeing this? The things that we go after so hard, Moses walked away from. By the world standards, Moses had it made: fame, fortune, power, privilege. But he walked away. The Bible says because he knew these things don't last, and that there was something better comes around sooner or later. And then finally, Moses chose to live by faith, not fear. He persevered because he saw God who was invisible by faith. Now, Moses really did have every right to be terrified. He had every reason to be afraid. And I hope you know the story of Moses enough that to realize that after Moses made this decision, after 40-some years, he's the one who comes back to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." He stands in front of his grandfather and basically faced him face to face and said, "About 2 million of us want to leave Egypt." And they did, by faith in God. 2 words, they're super quick, they're super religious, by faith. Use them all the time, but Moses could see the invisible God who can't be seen. That could be our most difficult choice this morning. How's our faith? It's not so much our 401k or our bank account or social status, the economy, or it's faith. Paul writes in one place, he says, "No one can please God by simply obeying the law." Oh, shucks. Obeying the law, it's hard. But at least I know what I had to do. But God says, you can't please me that way. So Paul says, so we put our trust, our faith in Jesus Christ, and God accepts us because of our faith. It really does begin with faith. The question is, how long you got to work with doesn't matter without faith. And it does seem fairly important to God that you go with the things that are important to Him, not so much the culture. And it's a practical thing, I think, is, without pain, there's no gain. The question is, when do you want to be a man or woman of courage and commitment and maturity? And then finally, the ultimate decision is what we're talking about. As I face the future, who am I? I'd like for you to stand and we'll share together one final beautiful little chorus.